Hey there everyone, and welcome to D&D Doge's Emporium of RPG Horror Story Cringe. In today's episode, we have a tale about a dungeon master trying to trick his players into a board game night, a story about a murder hobo basically wanting to be Wild Bill, and more. So, without further ado, let's get into these stories. Dungeon Master bait and switches D&D night for board game night, by Reddit user Atomic Card. First off, I would like to say that I don't have any ill intention towards DM, as we have been friends for a long time. Over the pandemic, I joined a dungeon crawl campaign hosted by someone I used to play with in real life in high school. He hosted board games, Warhammer, Magic the Gathering, and tabletop RPGs at his garage every Saturday. The campaign generally progressed well. About a month or so ago, Dungeon Master indicates to the group that he misses board games and that his in-real-life board game group disbanded during COVID, and for whatever reason, did not get back together, leaving him without a current outlet. He asked people in the D&D campaign if they were up for trying to play some board games online. Unfortunately, there was not much interest in online board games in the group, and I, personally, was never really that into board games. Our sessions are played once every other week, and in this week's session, the party wanders into a hall with a large table in the middle. As soon as we enter, the doors slam shut. After doing some investigation, we find a riddle about a, quote, road to victory that will clear the way written on the table. Inside the table, we of course find a board game that is not Catan. We eventually deduce that in order to open the doors, we would need to win the board game using the longest road victory condition. One of the player characters asks if we're doing a gaming set check to see if we can do it and how long it takes us. The DM replies no and moves us to a new Roll20 map where he has basically set up a not Catan board. He tells us that we will need to play out the game to pass the puzzle and proceeds to explain Roll20 decks and links us to the Not Catan rules. I haven't played Catan in more than a decade, and I am no longer familiar with the rules. One of the other players has never played, so we have to take an extensive break to go over the rules. I asked him why he thinks that we would want to play Not Catan when no one was interested in board game night, and if he would reconsider his position on the gaming set check. His position was that this was a legitimate D&D puzzle and shouldn't be bypassable with just a check. He also informs us that he spent the last 2 weeks prepping a few board games for Roll20 and giving them a fantasy reskin, and that this is all the content that he has prepared for the session. At this point, I just excused myself, honestly a bit stunned that he would think this would be appropriate. I understand not wanting to run D&D anymore and or wanting to play board games, but come on, man. Yeah, what the DM did here is a bit manipulative, with trying to sneak in a board game night under the pretense of a D&D session, and rationalizing it with it being in the campaign universe and all that, especially after he floated the idea and no one seemed interested. It's kind of like someone telling you that you're going to go to the park, but what they don't tell you is that on the way, you're making a pit stop at the vet. If the DM really wanted to take a break from D&D, he could have just told the players that it would be nice to take a break from the stress of DMing for a week here and there, and that it would be nice if the players would indulge him. Yeah, that is a bit guilt-trippy, but it's loads better than trying to trick them into it. Or he could always look for groups online if he really wanted to get in his board game fix. Either way, he definitely went about it the wrong way, and probably broke some trust in the process. Though, what do you all think? Let's move on. Best way to keep low. Explosives? By Reddit user Slaughts90. When I was in college, I was part of an official gaming group that had an umbrella of things from video games to Magic the Gathering to tabletop RPGs. I only say this because mostly the groups that were into those things rarely branched out to do other things. One session I was part of was a 5 to 6 player group playing Serenity, the Firefly tabletop RPG. when one of the guys who normally played Magic the Gathering with the others decided to ask if he could join in with us. We were delighted someone wanted to join, so the GM helped him build a character. We will call him Jerry. The brief summary is that we're a group of browncoats on the run from not just the Alliance, but from a band of criminals that were not happy with us blowing up one of their illegal labs. So the vibe is trying to keep low while we reach out to contacts. In this session, the crew, including Jerry, was going to a station undercover so we could smuggle someone out. Everyone else was keeping cool and made our rolls well to avoid the attention of station security. All except for Jerry. What we quickly found out is that Jerry is a troll player who wanted to be an agent of chaos and to hell with cooperating with the other players. How do we know this? Well, while part of the group was at the warehouse for a pickup, Jerry decided to start throwing explosives into the middle of the market district of the station over the objections of our characters, which of course had station security on us quickly. Trying to maintain cohesion, my sniper and another character tried to defend Jerry, but he just cowered and did not listen to either in-character or out-of-character advice to stick with us. When asked out of character why he did that, it was along the lines of, "Because I wanted to," in a dismissive way. Later, in the same session, while on our ship, Jerry fumbled about, doing random crap, like fiddling with controls, badgering us with irrelevant conversations in the middle of important moments, and then tried to harass one of the women on the crew. That last part was enough for the GM to call time out and say that he either stop that and cooperate with the players, or not come back. He just shrugged and did nothing else by the end of the session. We weren't heartbroken when Jerry just never came back to the session, going back to the Magic the Gathering tables, while every now and then joining a different tabletop RPG group, and from what I heard, still did his uninteresting Chaos Agent shenanigans. In our game, his character got ejected out of an airlock with no objection from any of the other players. TLDR. New player gets accepted into our group, only to be a chaos gremlin in an unfun way. Just cuz. Honestly, that GM should have paused the game the moment Jerry wanted to throw explosives willy-nilly in the middle of a civilian area. This was a clear-cut sign that Jerry only wanted to be a troll in the game, and the fact that he got all the way back to the ship and continued playing is beyond me. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm all for game masters giving players agency over their characters, but when something like this happens when a new player joins a long-running game, some sort of intervention should happen. I'm also surprised that Jerry was able to float around and do the same thing to other tables, though I'm sure, eventually, word of mouth probably led Jerry to being permabanned from the tabletop RPG side of that club. Anyways, let's move on. Problem player blows up on me because my story doesn't make sense. By Reddit user, throwaway, that's a lot of numbers. Context. I'm the DM for a 5e campaign that has been running for 2 years now. We have a cleric, monk, and a wizard. The wizard is the problem player. Monk is my best friend, and was dating wizard for about 4 years at that point. I never much liked the wizard. She was generally rude to me, and everyone else I knew. But I decided to include her for the sake of appeasement. A big mistake on my part. I consider Wizard to be the problem player of the party because of a few reasons. 1. She constantly questioned my decisions as a DM and claimed that things would make more sense if X, instead of how I'm choosing to run the story. She also constantly questioned my rulings on rules, such as repeatedly claiming that a tie should go to the defender in terms of armor class versus hit roll, when it's actually the opposite in Raw, and more importantly, how I run things. I eventually just bookmarked the page in the DM's guide and showed it to her every time she said that. She got irritated very easily if things weren't going her way for her character or the party, such as when they encounter any sort of dilemma or challenge. Oftentimes, she'd simply check out and stop playing if she got too irritated. 3. She never showed up on time for sessions, despite us agreeing on a time and place weeks in advance. In the previous session, the party had faced off against a large force of enemies from an evil organization they had been tangling with for a while. The forces had attacked the party's hometown, which was a big moment since previously they had only tangled with them in the wild. The party took a prisoner, who just so happened to be the monk's in-game ex-girlfriend, who the monks still had feelings for. The party decided that the best place to store the prisoner was in the town jail. The party then met with the captain of the town watch to discuss a potential defense plan against future attacks should they occur. The party and the captain both agreed that a coalition between the town watch and the mercenaries guild that the party worked for would help things. However, the captain stated that given that the prisoner they took is part of that evil organization, he stated that he would not allow the prisoner to be stored in the town jail for more than a day, since she poses a security risk to the entire town should the evil organization decide to try and extract her. The party would either have to execute her or find somewhere else to keep her. Throughout the session, Wizard had been getting progressively more and more irritated as she tended to. One particularly telling moment was that Monk had cooked lunch for Wizard and rudely said that it was dry and overseasoned. But apparently, this was the final straw for her. She began to raise her voice at me and eventually just started yelling at me. She claimed that my story didn't make any sense because, given the guard captain wanted to form an alliance with the guild, he should be on the party's side about everything. I replied that just because he wanted to be allies doesn't mean he'll blindly accept everything that the party wants, and that his primary goal is the safety of the town. She claimed that I was arbitrarily putting up an insurmountable wall in front of the party, since there was no obvious solution for the problems of storing the prisoner. The cleric, a total sweetheart but knows when and how to stand up to people, replied that that's often how life works. Normally, I wouldn't let players see behind the curtain, but perhaps to calm Wizard down, I told her that there was a lead on a potential solution, literally around the corner. Which was true. I did have that planned out, and if she had just been patient for 5 minutes, the party would have gotten the lead. However, this was not good enough for her, and she simply said, "Nah, fuck this game. This is bullshit. I quit. Play without me." She then left the table and sat down on the couch, staring daggers at all of us. However, given that there are only 2 other players in the campaign, I decided that that was not an option, and called the session quits there. And I packed up and left, as I DM at Monk's place. I later come to find out that this was enough for Monk to go on a break from dating Wizard. They'd been having issues for a while now, and apparently this was the final straw. This break eventually was finalized as a full breakup. Wizard has since been booted out of the campaign, good riddance, and we have since replaced her with a much nicer player who's playing a paladin. TLDR, problem player goes off on me for her perception that the story doesn't make sense, gets broken up with by her partner, and gets booted out of the campaign. Well, at least it sounds like everything worked out in the end. It definitely sounded like Wizard was a bit of a control freak, and just couldn't handle any sort of conflict, even if it was make-believe. Perhaps she was just taking her frustrations with her relationship issues out on OP and his game. But I think that she was probably just this way in real life, and that is why Monk eventually broke things off. I'm glad to hear that this didn't end the campaign though. But before we move on to the next one, if you're enjoying the video, I hope you consider rolling a crit on that like button and consider subscribing. If not for me, then how about for Alice? But with that said, let's move on. Petty GM steals my money to give me cursed armor I can't wear. By Reddit user Ghosties FTW. This is a story from a few years ago when I used to play D&D 5e. We had a DM who was known to be a little petty when things didn't go exactly his way, which is pretty often because he was terrible at planning. We were running with some custom rules related to weapons and armor. The main point being that you could salvage materials for monsters to improve your gear. Fighting a fire-resistant monster? Take its skin to make leather armor, and you will get a few points for fire resistance with it. The DM had set up a giant fight against an adult black dragon for our party, and we had no chance of beating it, before he killed it for us with an NPC. My character asked the NPC if he was going to keep the dragon body, and when he said no, my character got his permission to harvest some of the bones and scales. Over the course of the next 10 to 15 sessions, my character saved the money and worked on finding a craftsman that could forge the dragon parts into a set of plate armor. I spent these sessions making no upgrades to my gear, struggling through fights with the weak gear so that I could make some powerful armor for my defender character. Finally, after almost 6 months IRL, I finally had the 25,000 gold pieces that the DM set the price point of the armor at. I spent another in real life month separated from the party looking for a craftsman to make the armor before I finally found one. The DM took my money and said that the armor would be ready next session. Perfect, I can finally rejoin the party and enjoy the game. Next session, I get the armor and start to go over the stats with the DM, and it's pretty good. The dragon bones provide 3 more AC than standard full plate set, and provided flat damage reduction on all non-magic attacks, and was armor that would be considered highly overpowered for our level. I equip the armor, and the DM goes to great lengths to explain in detail how, once I have the full set on, I hear a dragon roaring in my mind, and the armor flies off my body and lands back on the ground. The DM then goes on to explain that the dragon's bones held onto the resentment towards its killers, and I was one of 4 people in the whole world who could not wear this armor. I ended up leaving the campaign after another 2 to 4 sessions, because at this point, my character was bankrupt with gear that would not let me survive any more fights. When I finally walked away from the campaign, the other remaining players also walked, because this was just one of the many cases of the DM being a petulant child when characters were getting stronger than he wanted. Yeah, I would have left that campaign as well after that. If that DM didn't want a player to have that kind of armor, he should have never led OP on, and allowed him to waste all of that time and in-game money just to come to that result. And by the sounds of it, this wasn't the only issue with that DM. Though I would be remiss to not say that OP going off on a solo adventure for a month in real life is also kinda strange and likely to put a strain on the DM, since he probably had to do 2 forms of prep. One for the party that is still together, and one for OP, and then divide the time between the 2. So, if I'm being honest, that sounds a bit selfish on OP's part. Though, like always, those are just my thoughts. What do you all think? Let's move on. My player wants to make a coat out of human skin. By Reddit user, PageLR82. Yes, you read the title right. After a month of scheduling hell, my group has finally found a date for Session 2. This player and a friend of mine made a couple remarks about skinning NPCs during Session 1, but I figured they were jokes or empty threats. I was wrong. Tonight, all he talked about was the coat that he's going to make out of human skin. He and another party member actually go to a quiet alley in town and murder 2 homeless people in cold blood for the coat, but they have to flee because somebody sees them. Not only are the 2 of them hell-bent on murdering this witness now, but the guy has talked about poisoning the food supply to get bodies for his coat. I told him that people are obviously going to see his coat is made out of human skin, and that they're going to kill him. But he says, "They won't be able to tell. It'll be cured." You can pretty obviously tell when something's made out of human skin. At a point, I tell him to shut up, because he won't stop talking about his disgusting skin coat he's going to make with innocent strangers. I'm worried that I was a little harsh, but dude. After the session ends, he tells me, "If it's really that inconvenient, I can make a new character." And I say, "Well, can't you play the same character, but without wanting to make a coat out of human skin?" But he says no. So, that was Session 2. It sounds like the other 2 players want to play an evil campaign, and OP just wants a normal, no psycho campaign. Luckily, it was only Session 2, and I would suggest that the players in the OP sit down and have a session 0 to set what sort of game everyone wants to play, and what people's boundaries are. That is why session 0 is so important. That way, you won't have a surprise Wild Bill in the party. But that will be all for today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.